Welcome to today's Vital Signs 2019 report launch. My name is Kathy Newhook. I'm the Manager of Communications and Engagement at the Harris Centre and the project lead for Vital Signs. We have a few housekeeping items that we'd like to take care of before we get started. Emergency exits out through the main doors, and you can either go down the stairs or out through the doors you probably came in through. And the muster station is out towards the dumpsters towards the end of the parking lot. There are washrooms. There's one accessible single stall washroom just outside the door right here. There are more washrooms located down the hallway as you came in. You can turn off your cell phone or turn it to silent. That would be appreciated. And we'll be taking photos during the session. So let us know if you don't want those to end up in some sort of Harris Centre communications thing. And I'll do my best. We're also webcasting this morning's session rather. And so welcome to the folks watching online, and also we'll have it on our website for sharing afterwards. Before we get too far into it, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the territory in which we are gathered as the ancestral homeland of the Beothuk, and the island of Newfoundland as the ancestral homelands of the Mi'kmaq and the Beothuk. We would like to also recognize the Inuit of Nunatsiavut and Nunatuavut and the Innu of Nitassinan and their ancestors as the original people of Labrador. We strive for respectful relationships with all the peoples of this province as we search for collective healing and true reconciliation and honor this beautiful land together. The format for today, we have set aside about 30-ish minutes for the presentation of this year's report, which you all have in hand, I hope. And then we'll follow that with a panel discussion and an opportunity to ask some questions and have a discussion about the topics raised in this edition. The report is also available online. It'll come out in the papers this weekend, come out in the Telegram, and also the weekly papers around the province during the week following that. But it's also available online, and we have limited copies, unlike usual, to distribute in-house. So we're hoping to utilize the online platform as much as possible. So you can link to that through the Harris Centre's website. It's pretty easy to find. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my director, the director of the Harris Centre, Dr. Rob Greenwood.
Thank you, Kathy, and good morning, everyone. Again, great turnout for the Vital Signs launch, and thanks to the media, lots of media coverage every year. This is year number 6, and really, I think, has become an institution in the public policy, community engagement discussion in this province. I'm in a car tomorrow morning out to Clarenville, speaking to Rotary on Vital Signs, and we're booked for municipalities, Newfoundland and Labrador, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So please reach out, get in touch if you'd like us to come out to your event or share more information. Really want to thank Kathy for the introduction, but especially for her leadership on producing Vital Signs. We work really closely with the Community Foundation of Newfoundland and Labrador. I'll try not to do my whole presentation before I start the slides. But it was great this morning. I did a quick interview on the morning show, had an email right after from Jennifer Guy, who was at the Community Foundation Newfoundland and Labrador when we made the initial discussion on them partnering with the Harris Centre to extend Vital Signs to Newfoundland and Labrador. And it's really been an amazing partnership ever since. I want to recognize Mandy Penny, who's in the audience right at the front on the corner here. And she's with Inclusion Newfoundland and Labrador and is part of a Disabilities Mentoring Day that was last week. And she and I are together as mentor and mentee. A lot of my staff are expressing their sympathies with her because, we're having fun already. And we're going to be throughout the day. And when last week the schedule didn't really work well, and we said, why don't we do it on Vital Signs Day? And Mandy is very involved in this whole environment of activity that we do with Vital Signs. She has a BA Honors in Psychology from Grenfell campus, Bachelor of Social Work from St. John's, and is planning to do the MBA in Social Enterprise. So Mandy and gentleman here this morning said, I saw Mandy present a few weeks ago and it was superb. And delighted to have her boss, Kathy Hawkins, with us also. So great to have you guys here. I'm going to get into the slides before I use up all my time. So Vital Signs is a Canada-wide partnership. In some regions, it's run by community foundation staff themselves. Others, it's partnerships with universities and others. It started in Toronto. Some good things do come out of Toronto. I was born in Toronto. I often say I'm a typical Newfoundlander of my generation. I was born in Toronto. Typical Newfoundlander today is born in Fort Mac. It's in 85 communities across Canada now. In many places, it's community level, Hamilton and area, say, but in Newfoundland and Labrador, it's province-wide. And it is the most extensive community-driven data program in the country, and usually includes more than 70 indicators of quality of life. There's loads of great materials online from the Community Foundation of Canada. And really, they initiated it to help their funding efforts identify where are the key challenges in their communities, where are the key opportunities, and to celebrate successes. And that really resonates with our work with the Community Foundation. Tim Crosby is here. I know other people from the Community Foundation. And we can't thank them enough for their leadership and enabling the Harris Centre to partner with them in what has really become such a great part of the Newfoundland and Labrador community assessment of where we're at and where we're going. In terms of how to use the report, and you all hopefully have copies here, and there are copies available, as Kathy mentioned. This isn't meant to be a definitive black and white, here's the answer. Almost nothing in life is, as we all know. But we do try to get as good data as we can get for the province, for the regions, for the communities, for the sectors, but primarily to get conversations going, because it's all about the shades of gray. It's all about the interpretations. It's all about the values we as a community collectively have, the ones we share, the ones we don't all agree on, but then having open conversations, debate, discussion. And in the world of social media and speaking to silos and in silos and limiting yourself to silos, this event, I think, is a lovely snapshot of the Vital Signs' role in this province, because it cuts across the silos. And the Harris Centre brand is all about integrity and independence while making a practical contribution. And one thing in our 16 years now, it's always about respectful conversation, debate, discussion. And so we really hope Vital Signs is consistent with all that. If in the conversations you have and the debate and discussion in your organization, in your family, around the kitchen table, there are issues you want to get active on, Harris Centre has a role to help broker with people at the university, but with YAFL, we also have a tool that's a world leader, and we'll have some announcements soon about YAFL with national reach. And so put us to use to help make connections and pass it on, take a stack when you leave today. Ultimately, though, of course, the bottom right-hand corner is what it's all about. Take action, and that can be politically, provincially. It can be within your own organization, your community, your family, or you as a person. It all adds up. So, and we've had examples already over the course of Vital Signs. I know on the Northern Peninsula, when Roddickton saw some of the early data, it really helped mobilize and take this serious. And it's easy, and I'll stop talking on the first slide very quickly, Kathy. She's going to give me some time warnings. Often with trends, we're like the frog in the pot, you know, the boiling frog, and the water is increasing very slowly, but it is increasing. And it's easy to ignore until it's too late. So some of this is to highlight some of the trends that we got to pay attention to that are not so good, but also there's lots of good things in chatting before the session this morning. So please put it to use. It's meant to be a tool. Right from the start, we emphasized infographics, and lots of people are doing them really well all over the place these days. But Presenting complex data in simple ways is not easy. Kathy and her team labor for hours and hours and hours to get it as simply as we can, weeks and weeks and months and months. But everyone loves if Newfoundland and Labrador was a village of 100, which is essentially percentages. Of course, women still outnumber men, but not in all forums in our society. And so lots of good work in that area over the last number of years, more to be done. Out of 100 people in Newfoundland and Labrador, 2 are immigrants. 2 are visible minorities. So we have a long way to go in that area, but we're making progress. 9 are Indigenous peoples, Labrador and island. And of course, with Halibut, significant numbers on the island, significant concentration in Labrador. Demographics, vital signs in the work of the Harris Center, and Alvin Sims has done a lot with us over the years, and Jamie Ward in our RAN lab, Regional Analytics Lab group, really highlighted a lot of this. I see Gerald Crane in the audience here today. Gerald was with the Rural Secretariat, did a lot of great work in this over a decade ago, 2 decades ago, probably now, Gerald. But when we understand our province, 4 under the age of 4 or under, 5 to 19, 15 out of 100. 65 and over, 19. So we're all aware of the aging population. We've done some good work looking at that regionally, because it varies significantly. And it does mean aging workers are going to be more and more important all the time. But it also means we need to be much more receptive to family-friendly policies and attracting and retaining youth. It's not either or. And we have a special section in Vital Signs this year on libraries and the reach across the province. And again, as some people looked at the early snapshots on the data over the last couple of days, this one may be surprising. 85 people out of 100 in Newfoundland and Labrador are within a 15-minute drive of the nearest library. And we get some more breakdown on that in the report. So we have ways we can improve for sure, but some areas, not bad. We, of course, will have Q&A discussion. We'll have a panel when I finish. So I'm sure, again, we'll launch the debate discussion here today. Civic engagement has been a key part of every Vital Signs and is part of the national template. And I'll come to some of the data we've used year after year in a minute. But one we looked at as a new slice this year was access to information requests. Much in the news, much used by the news, but some really interesting and perhaps surprising results. It shows you who is making those requests for access to information. Individuals, political parties, media, business, law firms, other. And the increase from 2013-14 to 2017-18, and the one that just jumps off the page, individual requests, jumped from 133 in 13-14 to 1,208 in 17-18. Did an interview this morning on radio. What does that mean? And of course, there's many aspects of that, and it's going to be interesting. The Harris Center was contracted through the Muskrat Falls Inquiry to Kelly Bladuc in political science, did a piece of work on that, looking at what are the impacts on speaking truth to power and keeping notes in meetings. And it'll be very interesting to see what the report recommendations come out with. And I talked about on radio this morning in discussion. It could go a couple of ways, any number of ways. But one of the impacts is, and I worked in government, you used to keep a bound book, and if you tore out a page, you could see the page was torn out. And you date it every meeting, every day, so you could see no, this meeting happened before that meeting. I used to call it a cover your ass book. But it was a way of documenting what was decided in meetings. But with access to information, a lot of those meetings are discussing policy development, brainstorming. You don't have the data yet. People now, there is a chill, and I think it's a real impact on the public service of being wary about writing anything down until it's approved. In my office, we use a line we used when I was doing my PhD. Best advice I ever got, don't get it right, get it written. And we do that every day. Dietra is nodding yes. Because many PhDs don't get finished because you research for 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 years, thinking you got to know it all before you write it down. But it's got to be an iterative process. You think and shape as you write. And innovation needs a freedom to experiment. Well, maybe our public policy is being hurt by this. But transparency, access to government decision-making, beware of Big Brother is really important. So these aren't easy black and white issues, but this one really highlights some of that. I could go all day on, we could have a conference on each one of these slides. Further on civic engagement, the turnouts in federal, provincial, municipal elections, pretty steady actually. Municipal lower, and we work very closely with municipalities Newfoundland and Labrador. They had a real good program, and we've done better in Newfoundland and Labrador, fewer vacancies in municipalities, but we actually have more acclamations. So enough people to be on the council, but not enough to have as many contested elections as we would like. But that also is an impact of population change and outmigration and aging population, and the work that Barb Neese and her team did in the On the Move project, looking at long distance commuting. A lot of people living in rural and smaller urban communities, but living away for half the time or more, which has significant impact on local government and the economy and the family and health. And we've done work on that in previous Vital Signs. On the economy, the 10,000 pound gorilla, or the $23 billion gorilla, is public debt. And we have some breakdown there of net provincial debt, increased by $5 billion in the last 5 years. Total public sector debt, which includes the debt of government, debt of the Crown corporations and agencies, guaranteed debt, debt by municipalities, all included in that public sector, increased by $11 billion since 2015. And we're all debating, discussing that constantly in the news. Need to keep doing that. But there are some indications in the economy, lots in fact, and at the personal level. So I said on radio this morning, we think about the good, the bad, and the ugly. This little section is kind of the ugly, the confusing, and the good. So the debt, certainly major concern. We can all debate, discuss how we got here, what we're going to do about it. When you look at bankruptcies, they're actually down. This is the confusing. How could that be? When Kathy and the team were developing that, scratching our heads. But then when you look at it, the timelines matter when you look at comparisons. So there was a surge of consumer credit around 2008, which had an impact. But even more importantly, federal government regulations implemented in 2009 made it more expensive to file for bankruptcy. So many people now use proposals to their creditors to deal with high debt rather than resort to bankruptcy. So I heard an interview this morning, construction workers really hurting in some sectors right now because not as many big projects and so on, and a lot of them during the good times incurred debt and now suffering because of it. So very important, and part of what Vital Signs is about, is unearthing some of these trends and saying, that doesn't make sense, let's talk about it. Meanwhile, house prices in Newfoundland and Labrador, the most significant expenditure most humans have in our society for sure, are still very, very competitive. Now, if you bought at the peak and you're wanting to sell soon, not so good. But if you're buying now or have housing, and then it impacts the property taxes, other than New Brunswick, we're the lowest average in the country. And so, yeah, a lot of factors to take into account in terms of the cost of living and so on. The main one, not so bad. Relative to historically in Newfoundland and Labrador, definitely higher. Compared to the rest of Canada, not so bad. Interesting stuff on income. Average family income has increased by 18% between 2007 and 2017. The highest increase in the country. Not everybody has enjoyed that, and we've got some more to say about that here shortly. But there's no missing the fact that the boom that happened, partly with oil, mining, government expenditures when the revenues were high, suffering now in the last few years, but a lot of people and there's a lag in the stats, so we'll see what it shows in a couple of years. But during that boom, a lot of people, a lot of families benefited significantly. In fact, some of the numbers here on household debt to disposable income as a ratio. So for every dollar of disposable income, how much debt do you have? For Newfoundland and Labrador, lower than the Canadian average. For every dollar of disposable income Newfoundlanders and Labradorians have, there's $1.44 of debt. The Canadian average is $1.83. Alberta, it's $2.15. No wonder they're so bloody miserable. And there's bumper stickers in Alberta, and we could probably learn from them. Please, God, give me one more boom. I promise not to waste it. Well, a lot of people in Alberta, and during the global financial crisis, economists called it irrational exuberance. Human nature, we just think the good times are going to keep rolling. There was a motto in St. John's during the boom, be the boom. Well, in a resource economy, we know boom is followed by bust. That's what happens with global commodities. So somehow we need to mature. Norway, with their $1 trillion plus fund, the government is often fighting community leaders who want more spent on infrastructure today. But if you inflate the economy too much when dollars are rolling in, but that takes discipline. And I've seen the enemy, and it is us. So some of this indicates families in Newfoundland and Labrador have adjusted and are more resilient, at least based on the dates around these numbers, than we give ourselves credit for. Again, we can debate, discuss, unpack. But there are people being left behind. And in previous vital signs, every year, after we got up around 20 of them, I'm going to have a hard time doing this, but the night before, I love to go to before the previous vital signs and see what we studied and highlighted. There's going to be a PhD thesis based on vital signs in about 10 years, I guarantee it. What were they saying during the boom? What did they say during the bust? What came after that? Well, we talked about during the boom, 4/5 of the population, growth in disposable income, average income, living the dream. The lowest fifth, or a little less than that, actually declined during the boom. That was unforgivable in a society like ours. And today, even despite those increases and good-looking numbers, we still have 68,000 Newfoundlanders and Labradorians living in poverty, about 13% of the population. Compared with planet Earth, that's pretty good. For a society as rich as ours, that's bad. And when you start to get into the numbers, 34% of them are single people, people not living in families, which, depending on your perspective and what your life is, may be counterintuitive, or it may ring true the second you see it. 37% of people living in lone parent families are living in poverty, single parents, and led by single moms. And when you look at the differential on incomes, men and women, not surprising, 40% of people living in lone parent families led by single moms are living in poverty. Kathy's giving me 10 minutes. I'm having so much fun. That's just to scare me. I'll go a bit over, only a bit. And yet, we have seen a slight decrease in the number of people receiving income support between 2010 and 2018. It was 39,000 down to 32,000, which is consistent with the gains in average income. So we are improving as a society, but we still have significant numbers left behind, and we need to address those. Taxes. I want to do a lot more on taxes and vital signs going ahead. It scares the hell out of Kathy. It's complicated. I think we could do little vignettes of individuals and where they were, an elderly lady living on her own 10 years ago, 5 years ago, today. A single parent 10 years ago, 5 years ago, today. A family with 3 kids. You get the idea. Well, Tom Cooper, brave business prof, did a little write-up for us. and talked about how, in fact, it's not as bad in Newfoundland and Labrador, tax rates, as we sometimes whinge about, especially for lower income. Higher income or higher than most provinces. So it depends a lot on your perspective, depends a lot on your values, but it's certainly something worth being aware of and discussing. And we highlight, as always in Vital Signs, stories about progressive community-based programs, stories about successful entrepreneurship and innovation, and we have some great stuff happening on the Bonavista Peninsula, and there's a nice little story there about one of the entrepreneurs and a couple drawing on expertise and getting into a new venture. So there's a bunch of those sprinkled throughout. You need the numbers, but you also need the anecdotes and the narratives. Work. Lynn Gambin in economics at Memorial, doing a lot of great work in this area, gives us some ideas of the skills that are going to be required. And there's a lot of work being done, provincial government, federal government these days, a lot of federal funding in this area. Harris Center is partnering on some of that. Transferable skills, clearly more important. I heard a great story at a session yesterday. Someone from the OECD, we were at the College of North Atlantic, and at a job fair at Memorial, education students talking to firms, saying, no, we're not looking for any teachers. Then they go to another firm and say, hi, don't tell them what you're studying. I have skills in doing presentations, doing research, doing an analysis. I'm able to think on my feet and speak to a group. I can do mediation, all the transferable skills teachers know. Oh, you're exactly what we're looking for. So understanding how to present and capture the skill sets provided in different types of education, really key to this. And then there's a whole bunch of occupational projections, and some of them, not surprising, some of them are. I need to unpack. I've led work on manufacturing years ago in Newfoundland. The biggest increase, according to the projections, are manufacturing utility sector. So I'd love to unpack that one. Maybe there's people in the room who can explain that one more when we come to the Q&A discussion. Further on work, great quote from Gilbert Lindstead, Labrador Fishermen's Union Shrimp Company, was at a session here a few months back, and he talked about how he used to get hell when he talked about automation in the fish plants on the Labrador coast. And he said today, without automation, he'd get hell because people thought it was eliminating jobs. Today, he said, I need automation to save jobs because I can't get enough workers in our region. We have the resource, we have the markets, and so automation, productivity gains, innovation. I'm a glass half full person. So you can look at the population challenges, fertility rates dropped, aging workers, but with automation, AI, innovation, we can do more with less. Rural Canada is a productivity success story. We're producing as much or more than we ever did, but with way fewer people. That's a problem for rural communities. For rural industry, that's a plus. But it takes training, it takes business leadership, it takes the right government policies, it needs organized labor to understand and be part of the solution, and they are. But it's not how we've grown up as boomers, or me. Sorry for all of you not boomers, not how I grew up. There were never enough jobs for the number of people. That's changed. And it's a cultural shift as well as a labor market shift, et cetera, et cetera. Kathy's really going to get mad at me any minute here now. Minimum wage earners, there's good data here. I'll start to skim, but we can come back to it in the Q&A discussion. Really interesting breakdown. Not surprisingly, 28% of minimum wage earners 15 to 24 years in the service sector, going to school, going to college, going to university, but not limited to those. And we are amongst the lowest in the country. We've had increases significant over the last few decades, but relative to other provinces, again, the discussion is it sufficient? And there's more work being done on that these days. Older workers, the silver ceiling. As we look at, and David Foote talked about the demographer the boomers aging as the python swallowing the pig, and you could see the bulge. We're all kids at the same time, teenagers, middle age, elderly. And we thought we'd have severe labor shortages sooner than this, but so many older workers are staying in the workforce longer, and we need them to. So we have a workshop at the Harris Center partnering next week on the 13th on a older workers summit. Climate change, the issue of the millennium, and it cuts across all other areas. We have a panelist from the private sector who's going to help inform that with us on the panel. But some of the numbers, when you look at the projections, we hear about it all the time, but when you look at it in the Newfoundland and Labrador context, really interesting in terms of the autumn, fall months, temperature increase, 8.8 degrees average increase, which is going to have major negative impacts on ice conditions when you think of the winter and the spring off the Labrador coast, the work that Trevor Bell and others are doing there. But it will also open up opportunities for new agriculture, but also more invasive species. I saw a guy who was in forestry once talking about this, more types of trees in Labrador in the future. And he said, no, it's not rocket science. It's much more complicated. So we need to be thinking about how these will impact the good, the bad, and the ugly of adaptation in our province. And then on greenhouse gas emissions, and it gives some breakdowns on the changes of different sources. Oil and gas industry expanding, obviously, is a source. But one of the biggest, we loves our trucks. And when you see people idling with no one in the vehicle when they run, give me a break. I've seen the enemy, and it is us. So that's cultural, it's educational, it's awareness, a lot to be done. Food, dramatic increase in the number of farms. I'm going to start skimming quickly here, Kathy. Decrease, sorry. Dramatic decrease. But a lot more attention now by government, by young people, local food, food security, cuisine. So some really positive trends, but we got a long way to go. Some of the immigrant population, lovely program, Association for New Canadians, who come with agricultural backgrounds, knowledge and expertise, and needing a job, able to work with the farming community in Newfoundland and Labrador. Have the fishery breakdown. Derek Butler's here. He'll answer all your questions later. Fishery, as Glenn Blackwood says, head of the Marine Institute, we get the fishery right, we have a never-ending mega project. That is province-wide. Lots of remaining challenges. Some stocks rebounding, some stocks in trouble, some stocks the catch down, the value up because of the price of the catch. So again, very complicated and regionally specific, but an enormous resource and an enormous industry. Medical, we're going to have on our panel a doctor to help drill into some of the data from here. We hear about the trouble getting doctors, family doctors, and yet some of the numbers, we have more family physicians per capita than elsewhere in the country. So what are we doing wrong? Some of the really interesting stuff on interprofessional collaborative practice, we're way lower than the Canadian average. So doctors, it seems, I'm no expert in any of this, feeling very isolated in their practice and can't take a holiday and unrelenting pressure. And you can be very committed to your patients, but you got to have a life or you'll burn out and be no good to your patients. So again, what are the innovations? I know Eastern Health doing some really interesting stuff on an innovation initiative in healthcare. And yet, once again, if there's an underlying theme on some of this, I have seen the enemy and it is us. Alcohol, sweets, obesity, physical activity, we're below the Canadian averages. It starts K to 12 or pre-kindergarten. It's families, it's culture, it's attitudes. But it comes down to the bottom line also. I mean, quality of life, living long is the ultimate goal, but being able to afford it is important to us these days. The nice upside, glass half full, there's loads of ways for us to do a better job individually, community, sectorally, because there's so much value left on the table, ways we can improve. If we were in trouble and we were doing everything possible that was good, we'd really worry. There's areas where we can improve enormously in recreation, fitness, awareness. Again, another example of that on healthcare and prescriptions. And I'm not going to try to pronounce some of these. We'll have a doctor on the panel. But an amazing initiative led by our pharmacy department, working in the community on de-prescribing. And again, the stats make your head hurt about the over-prescribing that's happening in our province. And through the de-prescribing initiative, counseling people who have 7, 8, 10, 14 types of medication, reducing the medications, and their health outcomes improve. And it's saving us money. A lot of interesting stuff on libraries. I touched on that at the beginning. 92% of the province population are within a 30-minute drive to the library. And of course, a lot more happening untraditional in libraries. And our funding provincially, still a major challenge relative to the other provinces. Arts, and some lovely stories here on the music school reaching out, Bell Island Community Initiative, and Indigenous Initiative. So there's loads of good examples of communities, institutions, addressing issues, best practices to adopt and spread. Interesting on charitable donations, we're not leading the country as I used to think we were, and some interesting changes there. We had no private sector partners on Vital Signs this year. Step up, please. Thank God to the NGO and university partners we had, who some have been with us right from the beginning, and the media partners, Saltwire, with the Telegram, Western Star, all the community papers, plus a website, plus all the media buy into and support this initiative. Can't thank you enough. Hopefully I've bugged everybody with some of the data and some of my comments. So let's get the panel up here. John Duff will get you wired up. You know who you are, and I know who you are. Jonas Roberts, Dr. Kathy Stringer, and Roseanne Leonard. I wondered who you were. Welcome. So I'm going to start off with a question to each of these folks, but then we're going to open it up to you. And we have mics in the room, and you'll put up your hand, and we'll get it to you, and you'll say who you are. You'll be succinct, and we'll see what the panel has to say. And again, none of us are pretending to have the definitive answers on any of this, but we all have our experience, our knowledge, our values, and we'll have a respectful discussion. And this will be just the launch, once again, for 2019 Vital Signs. All good, John? All good. So maybe I'll pick on Jonas with the tiny issue of climate change. Jonas is the climate change consulting group lead with Wood Environment and Infrastructure Solutions. He obtained his PhD in civil engineering from Memorial, where he explored climate model uncertainty. So Jonas, what will be the greatest impact of climate change on Newfoundland and Labrador in the near future?
Start
Small
with the
one.
Yeah. There's a couple ways to look at it. We can look at what the direct impacts of the changing climate and weather will be directly on the people of the province and the province itself, and then the indirect impacts, so like the impacts that are occurring around the rest of the world and what kind of impact they'll have here. With regards to direct impacts, it's most likely going to be more severe weather, and by severe weather I mean storms, increasing precipitation, stronger hurricanes, not necessarily more hurricanes, but stronger hurricanes coming up and impacting the province. I think we'll actually have a bigger challenge dealing with some of the indirect impacts. So this is where things like the droughts and heat waves that are projected and currently impacting the world's bread baskets are going to really put a throttle on our food supply. And like, I think everybody here is familiar with the food security challenges we have in the province right now. I mean, I can, there's a bunch of information in vital signs that you can refer to, but it's not just where the food is being grown and the challenges they're going to impact or they're going to experience, but also the supply chain challenges. So getting your cauliflower from California is going to have to go through a bunch of different regions that are going to be experiencing their own extreme weather challenges that they're not used to. So the costs of getting the food is going to go up. The cost of producing the food in other regions is going to increase because of their increasing challenges. So I think, personally, I don't know about you guys, but I really enjoy eating. And so that's really been kind of a personal focus of mine, and what I see as the biggest challenge, and also the biggest opportunity is, as you mentioned in the introduction, that we have our growing season will be extended, like particularly in the fall, we will have a warmer, longer growing season. So it does give us some opportunity to help address some of those challenges.
Super. Thank you, Jonas. And we'll have more opportunity for Jonas to weigh in. I'll move to Kathy Stringer. Dr. Stringer is a family physician and professor with the Faculty of Medicine, and an expert on rural health and healthcare delivery, and Memorial's medical faculty and health professions are leaders in the world on rural health. Kathy, why do many find it so difficult to find a family doctor in rural Newfoundland and Labrador?
I think there are a number of reasons. Our rural population is very distributed, a number of remote as well as rural communities. And that's it makes it very challenging to set healthcare teams in particular up in rural areas. We all know that primary healthcare is really moving across the country to working in interprofessional teams, and that's how we work best in health. But it's very difficult in isolated communities to set up these teams, and hence family physicians feel isolated and overworked and overburdened in smaller communities. It's very rewarding work as a family physician to work in a small community and be involved in that small community. But it is a 24/7, 365-day-a-week job. And there's only a certain amount of people who can take that on. And yet in teams that it can provide an amazing amount of support for physicians. I think the other important thing is that we're learning more and more the importance of training our medical students and our residents in rural communities. And in doing so, hope to really, and the data shows us that the earlier you train and introduce learners to rural communities, the more they feel accepted there and the more likely they are to stay. So I'd encourage all communities, if you have learners in your communities, incorporate them into communities in all the various ways that in Newfoundlanders are so good at doing, and it will definitely equate to more physicians staying in the area. But I think that the difficulties are the really distributed population, the lack of interprofessional teams, and the expense of ensuring that our learners are trained in these areas and that we have people in work in these areas.
Super, thank you. Roseanne Leonard, no stranger to the Harris Centre and a lot of our work around rural Newfoundland and Labrador. She's the managing director of the Newfoundland and Labrador Association of CBDCs, Community Business Development Corporations. I think there's 15 of them.
Correct.
And she has extensive knowledge of the business and entrepreneurial landscape of Newfoundland and Labrador, especially in rural parts of the province. So Roseanne, there's a lot of folks worried about the economy, and obviously there's changes in lots of ways. Mm-hmm. But are there areas you've noticed that are growing in the past 5 years or so?
Certainly. A number of sectors are actually demonstrating resilience and growth in the province. We worked with RANLab to produce reports in 15 of the regions, and one area stood out that had a great opportunity across everybody for growth, and that was agriculture. And as a result of that, you are seeing really innovative ideas popping up throughout rural Newfoundland and Labrador. And in our world, rural just means outside St. John's and Mount Pearl, although we do work within that region as well. They're coming up with really creative ideas and how to do different types of hydroponics, vertical farming. You're looking at a lot of people coming up with ideas on how to do their own food creation in their own house. It's a community effort as well. In addition to that, you have a lot of these regions that are coming up with really gainful employment ideas and high-tech ideas in communities. There's a new business, I shouldn't say a new business, there's a young business, Aguathuna Drafting and Consulting, operating out of Port-au-Port. And they do really innovative drone technology work with municipalities, with the mining sector, and a number of other industries in their region. And when you ask Jamie Guzny, where does he want to be in a few years? He's talking about, I want to have civil techs employed. I want to have land surveyors working with my company. So he's not seeing his company growing to the extent of hundreds of staff, but the staff that he is employing are educated, and he wants to keep them in Port-au-Port or Kippens. And so you're seeing that resilience in companies wanting to make sure that their roots are deep in the community, and then that they're supporting those employees that they're working with.
Super. Thanks, Roseanne. Lots of grist for the mill just in those three, but also elsewhere in Vital Signs. So Kathy has the mic, and we will happily bring it to you. If you put up your hand, you can introduce yourself. And as you know, I can fill air, so I'll just keep talking. And it can be on the issues we raised here or anything else that's in Vital Signs.
Rob, I'd like to speak to you.
Oh, okay.
You raised the comment about bankruptcies in the province, and that is interesting. I can certainly speak to the stats of the rural businesses in Newfoundland and Labrador. And over the last couple of years, we've seen a tremendous new startup growth. We're seeing our percentages for existing businesses and startups looking for existing assistance. The startups are jumping up. And then what we're seeing in terms of those issues, those doubtful accounts or allowance for write-offs, they haven't significantly increased over the last couple of years. What we are seeing is more and more businesses coming to us saying, I'm having trouble, I'm having difficulty meeting payroll this week. What can you do? So when organizations like ours and other support organizations work flexibly with those businesses. So if it is in terms of let's help you with employment issues, let's help you, why are your receivables in trouble this month, and doing more of that training and analysis, you're preventing those write-offs from ever coming to fruition. So the businesses are identifying those trouble spots earlier and earlier, and then recognizing that they can kind of work through them.
Great. And Mandy is on the other side with a mic as well. If anybody, I have a couple other questions I can keep going. Have one here, Mandy, at the front, in the middle there. And you can introduce yourself and then.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Emerson from Women in Science and Engineering. And we very quickly saw the slide about the occupational projections over the next while. And I was surprised because of the other issues that you've all been discussing about the need for innovation at a technological and health delivery method, to see that the projection is that there'll be a decline in the projections of individuals employed in the natural and applied sciences sector. I would have thought that there would be opportunities for growth there.
And I don't expect any of these folks to be experts on that, but they all touch on it in ways. So, Kathy, did you?
I think within the health sector, if you look at the numbers, as I said, we have a large number of, for example, family physicians in Newfoundland and Labrador. But I think that the future is going to be around reorganizing how it is that we deliver health versus necessarily having a whole lot more people in health. We need to look at our numbers of who's doing what within health and how can we maybe work more efficiently together to actually produce better results than necessarily just churning out more numbers. So I think within the health sector, that may be one of the explanations as to why that there isn't going to be much more opportunity. When you balance as well the number of people retiring to the number of new people coming in, it'll probably equalize out. So I think maybe that speaks to some of the numbers. I think that there's also a lot of opportunity as we go forward to look at, we mentioned artificial intelligence and things like that, like how can we deliver healthcare? It may not be the traditional circumstance that we're all used to, which is uncomfortable to many of us, thinking maybe I won't be sitting right next to my family doctor or my specialist or whatever member of the healthcare team is providing that. Maybe there are other ways to deliver healthcare that are more efficient and not necessarily having to have more people involved.
Roseanne, did you want to weigh into that one?
Certainly. When it comes to the sectors that we're working in, we're starting to see businesses that are recognizing the different skill sets that they can bring in that they wouldn't traditionally employ. There's a dairy farm in central Newfoundland now that's looking at having an industrial engineer from the CNA campus to come in and do an overhaul of how they operate. How can we run our operation much more streamlined? So the dairy farm itself will be identified in an agriculture sector, whereas the industrial engineering graduate wouldn't necessarily have been identified within that sector, but the skills are what the employers are recognizing that they need to be creative and identify where can they get them.
Jonas, you are one of those workers.
And it's what we're finding. Well, what I think is it's actually going to be harder to categorize the different sectors. We're like, the people on my team, that they're just so diverse in their skill sets, and they have specific expertise, but they do things across a whole range of the sectors that we're talking about. And our clients are the same thing, and they're not looking for the traditional solutions. They're not looking for just to get another job done the same way it's always been done. It's they're trying to keep pace, and they want to stay ahead of their own competitions and the needs of their own clients. So we're seeing that the more diverse and adaptable, and it's really the aptitude of the people that we bring onto the team that is kind of our focus, rather than, oh, you have a degree in engineering, we'll give you this engineering job. Like, I have a degree in engineering, and I don't do much engineering at all in the traditional sense. So it's good. Those lines are going to be blurred. The pie chart is going to be more of a color spectrum, I think.
We need to get this panel into every junior high in the province. Kathy, you have someone there?
A point of clarification on the demand versus job openings, only because it was a tangly chart for me to understand and make sure that I was really clear on what was happening in that information. So if there's, you can see there's a decline, I think it's a 7%, or is it 3%? I don't have it in front of me. But there's a decline in the overall demand in the sector, so the total number of workers in the sector there's a slight decline, but there's still going to be job openings in that sector. So it's not to say that there's a significant drop in the number of opportunities that'll be coming up in the next 10 years in that particular sector, but just to say that given the amount of people in the sector currently and attrition, as well as the contraction of that particular sector, there'll be fewer total workers in the sector over the course of the next 10 years.
Thanks, Kathy. You can tell you spent your last year immersed in that data. Other questions, comments from? Oh, good.
Teacher Walsh from Municipalities Newfoundland and Labrador, and I really appreciate everything. This is fantastic publication. One of the themes that runs through here for me is seniors, both in terms of the labor force and then the staggering statistics on prescription drugs. And of course, representing 276 municipalities, many of them in smaller communities, and we know of seniors as part of our discourse of the aging demographic. Yet many of our seniors are working and on councils, have many responsibilities in towns, and then we look at their needs from a health perspective. So I wonder if you can comment a little bit on those statistics. I mean, I'm very concerned about this. How do we value seniors in our province? How do we value them beyond just simply part of that aging demographic and statistics? And I wonder if you can comment on the primary healthcare model, which we were really touting 10 years ago as a means to address some of these issues. There's so many things to say about this, but perhaps that's the best place to leave it there. Thanks.
Thanks, Deetra. So I think Kathy will let you go first on this one.
Sue was quite alarmed by the statistics when you look at prescribing in the elderly, but I guess the positive thing is to know that it is being addressed. Now, in the Vital Signs, you saw the article on how the pharmacy school is really addressing that, and some great results from a pilot project that they had working with St. Pat's Mercy Home. I think, it comes back to the issue of support within the primary healthcare context and within seniors care. If you are presented with a senior in your practice who, for example, perhaps is depressed, if you're in an isolated community and you have no access to counseling or support for that patient, that patient may end up perhaps on an antidepressant when other treatment, non-pharmacological treatment, could have been offered. So again, it comes back to the promotion of us of working in teams, particularly in primary care and as family doctors, being supported appropriately such that we can offer our patients non-pharmacological treatment. The same applies to the pain medication prescriptions. If you have access, for example, to the supports required for somebody living with chronic pain, you may be able to offer non-pharmacological options. So I do think it speaks to that whole need to support family physicians and patients in their primary health care. And that can be done in non-pharmacological ways if these are organized in primary care. And you are correct, we have been talking about it for far too long. But there are a number of ways that we are trying to start this interprofessional care. I know within our training program within family medicine at Memorial, we really try and expose our learners to that, because it's a different way of practicing and a whole different set of skills that needs to be learned by the new family doctors we're graduating now. You mentioned about how transferable skills, the same things apply in medicine. And so we're graduating physicians who have a different set of skills and so able to work in teams, and I think that will hopefully address some of these overprescribing issues. And you are correct, we need to address our seniors' care better, and I think that that's one of the ways that we can do that.
Super. Roseanne and Jonas, don't feel obliged, but from your perspectives, thoughts on the seniors' role in your area?
There's actually a great deal of opportunity for seniors to take on an even larger leadership role in our communities. We've got, within those reports that we received, we recognize the CBDC Trinity Conception governs the Trinity Conception area. They're recognizing that there is a demographic and an opportunity there for businesses to cater to this group, whether that be different types of creative living, different types of active living. And not only that, but also looking to them as a potential to help dealing with employment issues, in the regard that it could be part-time if it's of a gainful position to the person. So there's a lot of opportunity within that market as well that we see for the general public. And again, it's going to be in certain regions where there are more services provided, but it's something that we need to look at as an opportunity and not necessarily just a challenge.
Jonas, any thoughts from your?
I would echo that exactly. Looking at our shifting demographics is an opportunity to learn specifically from our seniors. They've survived many decades in one of the harshest environments in the world, long before a lot of the modern technology has been around. They know what it's like to produce their own food. They know what it's like to survive through hard times. And we really do need to engage with them to get that knowledge transfer and make them more integrated parts of the community. And I think it can only benefit everybody in that sense.
Super, thank you. Kathy?
Just add one more thing. I think that health is more than illness, right? So, engaging, again, I'd encourage communities to be engaged. You don't need to be a physician to positively impact the health of our seniors. Developing community groups that promote exercise, promote activity, promote social engagement and interaction are all incredibly important aspects of health and can actually directly impact, as I said before, prescribing numbers, because if our seniors have the opportunity to exercise, to be interacting, to be socially engaged and be meaningful members in a community, I think that would actually equate to a decrease in the illness experience and hence a decrease in medications. So it's really a joint responsibility of us all.
Thank you. I think we have another question or comment.
Yes, Fraser Pickett. I'm one of those engaged seniors.
Great.
The question that I have is that, as you know, oil is a dramatic part of our province and will be for quite a few years to come. You referenced Norway. You also referenced Alberta. They established a heritage fund right now in our province. That's been neglected for the last 15 years when there were a boom going on. What are your views on the importance of establishing a heritage fund for Newfoundland and Labrador, considering the fact that we're out in Alberta, their heritage fund is sitting at $18 billion. Now, there is a country, as you know, same time frame, same amount of oil being produced. Their heritage fund is at $1.3 trillion, and that's Norway. So the importance of us doing something with the oil to sustain those particular industries that you've been speaking about, and even using that money to be able to be put back into our renewable resources, because that's going to be gone. What's your viewpoint on the importance of possibly establishing a heritage fund here in Newfoundland and Labrador?
Welcome your views. Roseanne, want to go first?
I'm certainly a big supporter of that perspective, but prior to even setting up a heritage, we need to be able to get debt management under control, and promoting debt management to the provincial government and to every household. So it goes back to what Robert said, it is very much an education piece. And in order to get to that stage, and I don't think it would take us that long, once you automatically say we're going to start in on having a heritage, putting it into place, but also protecting that boom and bust, recognizing that there will always be that bust, but we have so many sectors in this province that can show a great deal of steady growth. So recognizing the role that they play as well, and it goes back to that debt management.
Kathy, you want to weigh in on that one?
Not really. I mean, I think it just speaks to that long-term planning and the importance of long-term planning. I mean, when you're talking about health initiatives, they require long-term planning. You know, all those numbers that you mentioned, that you project, you have to have a long-term view. So yes, I would agree. In healthcare, that would be important.
Jonas?
So that's a big question. And I think on the surface, it does seem like a very good idea to establish a heritage fund. I think it actually gets very complicated once you get down into the weeds. You know, we always look to Norway as the shining star, the shining example. It's like, you know, we could have done that if we had established this many years ago. I'm not sure if that time has necessarily passed for Canada and for Newfoundland specifically. You know, going back to getting our fiscal house in order is going to be important. I think rather than, you know, this is my own personal opinion, but rather than establishing a heritage fund, I think that we could have a better long-term impact on the ability of our province to survive and thrive in the coming decades, to have targeted investments in ways to, you know, diversify our economy and make our communities more resilient. So I think that if we dedicate some of those funds to a heritage fund, we might be missing on opportunities now that will set us up better for the future, so we wouldn't actually need to take advantage of such a fund.
When the Harris Center was established in 2004, we started with 4 regional workshops and a provincial summit, which was in Corner Brook. And there was a presentation exactly on that, and the Premier sat in on that session at the time. And we, in the 4 sessions and the provincial summit, we did the democracy thing and had everybody after breakouts prioritize what things should be done to prepare for the future. The number one was career counseling in K-12 because of the changing economy. And so it's really interesting. Many of these issues we're still wrestling with and need to. Other questions, comments? One at the back corner there by the door. And then we'll have one up the front, Kathy, after that. Right up the front. But first, back by the door. You can introduce yourself.
I'm Bernadette Cody. I'm with Metro Business Opportunities Corporation. And I guess my thing is about the greenhouse gas emissions. So everywhere you hear now the environment, we're in trouble. And we are in trouble, make no mistake. But when I look at this, and we're so quick to blame the oil and gas, and they play a role as well. I look at like road transportation and waste and even public electricity, which comes back on us. So I look at I'm in Paradise, so I look at on my street alone, we recycle. There's very few of us. There's probably 40 houses and maybe 5 of us, 6 of us recycle. How do we get everyone, not just oil and gas and not just big production companies, to actually start recycling and play our role, whether it's recycling, carpooling, whatever. So what's your advice to that, to get everybody to look at climate control and not blame so-and-so.
Right on. Great question, comment. I think Jonas should be a good one to start with on this.
The most effective way is to drive that systemic change is to make those more sustainable choices the easiest, cheapest option. So we can all play our part. I think it's important that we all do things. Reducing the amount of car trips we take, the amount of flights we take, reducing food waste and recycling, as you mentioned. But I think really until there's that systemic shift that makes it the default choice for people, then I think we'll still be kind of picking away at the edges of the issue.
Would Roseanne want to weigh in on this one?
Certainly. I think when you hear about the issues that are happening with our municipalities now and wastewater management systems, and recognizing that here in this province, most of them will not have the capability to deal with that. So when a decision like that comes into play, it really needs to have that local rural contribution into why that decision was made in the first place, because we cannot set up systems to put in place that are going to be at the detriment of rural Newfoundland and Labrador, and it's certainly urban and rural. So I think when we're talking about how can we get things to move forward, those decisions really need to be made at the local level, or decisions have to be made with local level contributions. How is this going to impact us, and how can we make a difference?
And Kathy, don't feel obliged, but if you'd like.
I just think briefly, if an individual knows how it's going to affect one personally, so educating and publicizing how that actually impacts each person individually, for example, their own health and well-being, I think is just another way to try and encourage involvement.
Super. Have a question, comment from the gentleman at the front there.
I'm Nadeem Saklan from Faculty of Education. There was the news from VOCM that 1,300 people left the province in the first 3 months of this year. So my question is, where we are standing in terms of retaining our people in the province?
Small question. Who'd like to go first on that one?
I think we need to provide more opportunities for businesses to recognize that there are skilled opportunities here in this province, and that they need to cast a wider net when they're looking to recruit. We have a lot of educated people in this province, and we need to be able to get them more gainfully employed. And employers need to play a role in trying to identify where they can find those pockets. So not just relying on doing an ad looking for someone that fits a certain description, but goes back to what Rob had said. Maybe it's not necessarily the designation, but the skill sets that you're looking at. So really being engaged in trying to identify what would be a really cool skill set to work with us, and not being so restricted in a designation.
Kathy, want to?
I think in healthcare, we've recognized, for example, as I said, that training our own people to become physicians, and particularly rural family physicians in this province, is definitely shown to be effective. And I think we're recognizing that, and we're very focusing on that at Memorial. But retention is still a problem, and we do have a loss of a number of our trainees once they graduate. And I think it's not necessarily immediately after graduating, it's sometimes actually after working for a while and realizing how difficult it is, and then going to look for greener pastures. So, continued looking at what are those stresses that are taking physicians out of this province. Can we address them through an impact, as I said, for example, on these teams? Can they positively affect the whole work-life balance, etc.? Can that perhaps retain our physicians better? So for us, it's the recruitment. I think we're starting to get our head around. It's retention that is important and needs ongoing work.
Thanks. Jonas, on that one?
So I think that there's a few things. One is that with the evolving global economy, like people on my team are in the provinces, all the Atlantic provinces, Ontario and Germany, and people choose where they live because that's for a variety of different reasons. But for people that are raised in Newfoundland and trying to retain them, that's one side of the puzzle. They can participate and be involved in these. They don't even have to be large companies, but they can work with people across a variety of geographies and still be on those teams and do their work here in a lot of evolving industries. And I think a trend that we're going to see in the coming years is the exact opposite of what we're seeing recently, is that there are going to be tens, if not hundreds of millions of people displaced in the coming decades, and Newfoundland is going to be an ideal location to come. Part of the reason for that is because we're not expected to experience the severe droughts, the severe heat waves, the severe coastal flooding. Now we will experience some of those things, but not to the same degree. We will have water. That's a huge driver for where people choose to go. So it's important that we engage newcomers to the province, especially refugees, which will be increasing in the coming years. And I think just some of the examples in the report, like how, engaging them with local farmers and seeing all this innovation coming from these different perspectives, I think I was very excited to see those programs happening. And I think that programs like that are going to be more and more important as we move forward.
Super. I was feeling like I was going to have to weigh in on that one, but I think you covered it all, so great. We have a question comment over on this side.
Marilyn Reed, one of those seniors who isn't working. And my question is around work, because it seems to me that there's been a huge paradigm shift in that we have more and more precarious employment, yet we don't seem to measure it, and there's no measurement in the vital signs report. I'm really interested in knowing what percentage of our workforce is actually engaged in full-time employment with one employer. In other words, a 35 to 40-hour week. I'd like to know how many of our workers are involved in contractual work now. And I would like to know how many of our workers have more than one job and two jobs. And I'm just wondering if those statistics are available, and if not, why not?
Great question, and there's a lot of work in that area. I'm not sure if we've had anything specific on that in Vital Signs previously. Kathy, do you remember?
No, that does not ring a bell, but I think it's a really, really interesting question. And so I think I'll be tapping on some shoulders and trying to get to the bottom of that maybe for the next edition.
Because we are always looking for next themes, issues, priorities, but precarity, the gig economy, the difference between young and old, but it differs within each. Panel, I'm sure, may have thoughts on that. Anyone want to weigh in?
There's an interesting comment or an interesting thing that's happening now in some of the smaller communities, in that if you've got 2 or 3 nonprofits and their budgets aren't growing significantly, but they are looking and they need, say for instance, a communications specialist. So one of those organizations can't fully fund a satisfied position in that job. So now you have 2 and 3 different organizations partnering together to create one well-paid job. This person can now actually make a substantial, comfortable living living in a community, but working for 3 organizations. Now there's still some tweaks that have to go into that. You have to be able to work flexibly. Organizations have to work together to provide for that position. But it goes to show that we can create these valuable jobs in a community if employers, nonprofit and for-profit, think creatively and want to work together, rather than I want this person all for me, but I can't afford it. So it has to be supporting that creative change to how we view employment.
Jonas, did you or Kathy?
Just want to build on what you were saying, is that collaboration is becoming more and more important in my industry, and the engineering environmental consulting world. It's a lot of the RFP or proposals that we write are in collaboration with not only university or not-for-profit organizations or specialist technical companies that we don't have in-house, but with our traditional competition. And we're able to kind of share the resources in that way, and it benefits everybody. It benefits our companies, the people we partner with. It benefits our clients, because we don't have to go out and hire a specialist individual just for that one job and then lay them off at the end of the day, kind of thing. So,
Kathy, in your area? No. We have one over here. You can introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Danielle Stennett. I work with Population and Public Health at Eastern Health. And everyone has seen it, and we all know that we have some interesting health outcomes in terms of obesity and how much we exercise and eating fruits and vegetables. And as someone who grew up in rural Newfoundland, I didn't know what corn actually looked like unless it was in a can until I was in my 20s. So I just wanted to know any of your opinions on how we start to improve health outcomes, look at health promotion and prevention instead of dealing with our high rates of chronic disease, maybe starting to work towards decreasing that. There could be business opportunities. I know a lot of people from home look for areas to work out inside instead of outside in the snow. And also, Dr. Stringer, your opinions on that?
Great question. And I think in a previous Vital Signs we did have, was it Boyan Kathy Ma work? Yeah, on local stores and the foods they stocked in a rural community, in a larger center, in the biggest centers, and just the availability of healthy options. And I forget the term she used, but it's in one of the earlier Vital Signs. Food deserts, thank you. Kathy, did you want to go first on that one?
Sure. I think this speaks to, again, as I mentioned earlier, the concept of health is more than the opposite of illness, and it's really, and I think that as a profession, as family physicians, and as primary healthcare in general, we're realizing this more and more. And just personally, from my perspective, if I'm in my clinic and I'm chatting with somebody, it really becomes a huge issue when I'm trying to promote a healthy diet. And I know that is extremely expensive in Newfoundland and just not accessible to a lot of my patients. So it really is so vital, because before I get to the point where I'm having to prescribe a diabetic drug or a hypertensive drug or whatever it is, these could be issues that actually prevent a lot of that. So again, it speaks to the importance of developing interprofessional teams where I can then have contact with a dietitian, with an exercise specialist, with a recreational therapist, all these types of healthcare professions that can actually promote health rather than waiting until a patient comes to see me because of an illness. So I couldn't agree with you more. I think it is starting to happen, slower than we would like, but it is starting to happen. I think there are a lot of challenges, as you pointed out, in rural Newfoundland. And as I mentioned before, they relate to both having the appropriate healthcare professionals accessible to all populations, but also having food, and I'm going to leave that more to these guys, accessible. But it also comes back to kind of communities coming together and addressing these as issues together, rather than as I mentioned, as a personal illness issue. It's actually a community wellness issue, and we all need to consider these. As family physicians, we also need to step out of our comfort zone. And I'm not just a family physician in my clinic. During office hours, it's my role to promote community wellness as well. So, and I think that goes for all healthcare professions.
Super. Roseanne would have thoughts on this.
There are certainly a lot of business opportunities for that particular area, and we're starting to see them. If you had asked me 5 years ago how many diagnostics do I receive for hydroponic businesses, I would have said none. And within the last 3 to 4 years, that's significantly increasing. There's a business that's looking at how to use shipping containers to grow food in Central. So there's more and more awareness of that. But even to go to the other side of it, when you work with Succeed, who is doing such a great job at promoting growing your own food in your own home, on your kitchen, on your counter. So we are starting to see more of that, but we need to see more of that. My daughter's class right now has a garden, and they are teaching the kids how to grow the vegetables and how they can grow them at home. So I think education will play a significant role in encouraging the local community to recognize that if you have someone that's growing vegetables, to support them, to shop local, because then it'll just encourage more of that local healthy eating.
Great. And Jonas.
I love questions about food. Just building on what you said, again, there's this groundswell of people in my generation and younger generations that are finding themselves really passionate about producing their own food and becoming more self-sufficient, more personally resilient. And they're coming together in these online communities that really just support each other in their trials, their successes, their failures. Everybody really just kind of builds on what everybody else is doing. Like I planted some fruit trees recently that shouldn't survive here, but so far so good. And it's those types of things that I've learned from other people, and that other people are starting to learn just by connecting with these communities. And so it goes beyond just having access to fresh food wherever you are in the province. It also builds those communities and that sense of belonging, which can be a real challenge in a place like Newfoundland where the population is so spread out.
No, great conversation around that in the province now. There's a nice piece in Vital Signs by Ivan Emke, recently retired from Grenfell campus, on that. And I think food, for me, and Ivan talks about it, the seasonality in this province and the traditions. My backyard's full of stuff I eat. And rhubarb is the first thing up out of the snow. And my friend of mine has a real nice car. I couldn't afford it. But I guarantee you, I get more pleasure from my rhubarb than he gets from his. I know it. We have another question coming over here.
Viviana Ramirez from Zero Waste Canada. So recognizing the impact of oil and greenhouse emissions and recognizing that changes can happen overnight, how can we move slowly away from oil?
Super question, and probably the question of our time. I think we need a workshop or a conference or a series next year on this. Jonas, it's right in your wheelhouse.
So I'll refer back to something I said earlier, is that it's going to be because the non-hydrocarbon-based choices will be the best choices. It's going to be because it's going to be cheaper and faster and better to drive an electric car or to take an electric plane once they happen. Yeah, exactly. So I think that the transition isn't going to come from top-down pressure. I think regulation has a role to play. I think carbon tax is a must. But I think that for the full systemic transition to actually happen, it's going to be driven by advances in technology that make it more feasible and more accessible to a broader range of the population. And it's happening faster and faster. It's some of the little good news that we see these days.
Roseanne or Kathy on this one?
There are programs in Atlantic Canada now that can offer opportunities for financing for businesses to implement more greener technologies. And we're not talking about high-tech firms. It could go to a convenience store who wants to put in an electric charging station in their parking lot, or a small business that wants to install solar panels so it can reduce some of its other expenses. We need to see more of that. And I do think regulation may help with that, but it's also making sure that these businesses recognize that there are other options where they can get access to programming to help them make that transition to making their footprint less of a big mammoth print.
Kathy on this one?
I'm going to leave the details to these guys, but I mean, obviously from a healthcare perspective, it's important. We know the negative health effects of all the byproducts, etc. So, but I'll leave the details to these guys.
Great. We have time for a couple more questions or comments. One up here at the front and right behind him. Very efficient microphone management there.
I'll go one more time, Fraser Pickett. But with my involvement with what's called the Newfoundland Association for Community Living, and also as Provincial Advisory Council for the Inclusion of Persons with Disabilities, I was looking at your numbers for people living in poverty from the point of view of around 75,000. And you just mentioned investment within business. Within our province today, and out of your numbers up there, out of 100 people, 22 do identify with a disability. So there's a large population that is here in the province with disabilities. Out of those disabilities, and I don't know how you get this out, and I think it needs to be out there, that 28,800 individuals have a disability tax credit. Mm-hmm. In Newfoundland and Labrador, only 1,650 have what's called a registered disability savings plan. Mm-hmm. This is money that's up, the federal government has right now today, roughly when you base it on these numbers that have not simply applied for an RDSP, because it costs no money to do it, and not a cent. it represents over $200 million. If you get those people into an RDSP, and you take the 28,000 and do those numbers out over 30 years from the point of view of an investment, you're well over $4 billion that's sitting there. From a vital side, I think it's very important that we take a look at the people who represent disabilities within the province and come up with some numbers and inform them of, here's a way that you can guarantee your future by having the average person, even I've looked at some numbers, and the average person with $150 put in, and that's put there by this provincial government, when you move it out 30 years, it's roughly around the value is $200,000, and they never put I ran into a young lady that was disabled in a mall, and I had to stop and say, do you have an RDSP? The answer was no. It's so important for us from an economic point of view, and then being able to support themselves and also buy supports. I think somehow it should be added into the vital sign somewhere.
I know Roseanne's ears perk up with those kind of numbers. Any response, thoughts?
Certainly, that is a lot of money that's left on the table, and it becomes more than just the responsibility of your organization to share that, but the general public. Everybody needs to recognize where there are opportunities to help someone in a designation with a disability. If we can help pull forward Indigenous groups, if we can help pull forward a particular sector, we as a province have to start thinking more collaboratively across everything. Because we cannot operate again in silos. It does have to be spread apart, and we do have to recognize that social responsibility of us having to take care of our neighbor, and therefore then needing to know what are their needs and what opportunities can we provide to them.
Kathy or Jonas on this one, or?
I just think, it speaks to the importance of the support. You mentioned having supports and getting information out there. One of the things that we offer at our clinic is a clinic for adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And I can speak to my experience of speaking with a number of these patients and caregivers. The stresses for many populations with stresses, whether it be with disabilities or you say with other reasons for stresses, the day-to-day stresses are so extreme that sometimes, yes, that might be something that they know that is available, but even just getting to the point of being able to A, know that, B, know how to apply for it, go through all the stages, blah, 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 is quite a big step as opposed to literally getting through every day. So it speaks to the importance of support as far as promoting the health and wellness of all populations who have extra stresses in whatever way, such that they can avail of those type of supports that are there.
Jonas on that one? Good. Okay, we have another question here.
Okay. Hi, Gary Milley with Recreation Newfoundland and Labrador. And I'd just like to make an observation. I found the vital signs vitally important. Over the last number of years, I've always found something in there that talks about the state of the health and well-being of Newfoundlanders and Labradorians broadly. And it could be a sense of belonging. I remember a couple of years ago, Rob's sense of belonging was there. Civic Engagement is there now. But equally important is a number of conversations around being engaged personally or community-wise in family food development, being involved with the healthcare, wellness, as opposed to illness. And I really appreciate the comments regarding that, family physicians, are while they predominantly focus on illness, they are charged with trying to help wellness broadly in the community and quality of life. So when I hear my friend and colleagues over in the municipalities talk about the challenges around older adults, I do believe there is a pathway. And I believe the work we do in recreation, like in many of our urban municipalities, they have structured, organized recreation infrastructure and programs and services. But many of our rural areas have volunteer capacity. And we have a tremendous strength of involvement with service groups and youth groups and others who could be supported a little bit better to address some of the quality of life issues of Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. So I'd be interested in looking at, from the panel and yourself, Rob, a better understanding how we can work more collaboratively and more integrated, because I heard a couple examples about getting a communications coordinator in 3 organizations. Well, we had a program a few years ago where we had regional recreation directors, and that was very successful, but it didn't, budgetary considerations changed that. So I'm just looking at, would we probably have an opportunity to look at more interdisciplinary discussions with the healthcare system, with the environmental and food systems, and the nonprofit sector?
I think it's a great comment, Gary, thanks. And quickly, before I turn it over, an area where obviously the Harris Center has talked a lot, worked a lot, working with faculty members, Stephen Tomlin, Alvin Sims, Key Story, others, about regional service provision, working closely with municipalities, Newfoundland and Labrador. The YMCA has a great initiative. It was one of the best practices a couple of years ago written up about the partnership in Marystown, where the municipality, I'll probably screw it up, but the municipality provided the building, the Y provides the programming. I think they do that in other areas as well. So it's the collaboration to provide regional services that I think could open the door on a lot of the issues we're talking about. We have the weakest local government in Canada in our province. Canada has the weakest local government in the OECD, and yet humans live their lives in regions. So that to me is a real key element to this. But Kathy, do you have thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think there's a number of words that have bubbled up a number of times today, collaboration being one of them. And I think more and more we're realizing as we go forward, we need to collaborate. I'm not the only expert on health and wellness in this room. You are each experts on your own health and wellness, and there are a number of people who can form an important part of that team. But I think it's important to think about how we can, for example, from a family physician's point of view, how do we support family physicians to actually have that extra bit of time in the day to be able to focus on wellness, for example, in our communities rather than health. You read there in the reports how work-life balance and is not something that is achieved by the majority of family physicians, particularly in rural areas, and how a number of physicians are leaving the province. So how can we support those physicians better to actually have some time in the day to be involved in wellness activities, collaborating with other members of the community, and who is best to deliver that in an efficient way, such that everybody ends up gaining in the end. So I think you are correct. Collaboration is key. I think we've worked in silos for way too long, definitely within the healthcare environment, I can speak to that. And we're realizing that we have to break down these barriers and work together in order to address health and wellness in a more holistic way. But as far as the day-to-day lived experience, for example, of a family physician, we have to do more than just say, okay, that's your responsibility. You need to do that in addition to everything else that you're doing in your day. So we need to think about innovative ways within the structure of how we run our businesses as to how that can actually be incorporated, how we can actually be involved in the community in a meaningful way.
Thanks, Kat. Jonas, any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, so I think that people are finding and building their own communities in a lot of ways, and I think the internet plays a big role, because you can connect with anybody anywhere in the world at any time, and people are self-organizing into self-supporting communities. And it's, and even, within, the private industry, like Wood, the company I work for, is 60,000 employees across 60 different countries. But there are very strong online communities amongst people that have never met. And that just makes everybody so much more resilient, and really increases that sense of belonging, which is very important to anybody's well-being. So I think you're starting to see that kind of integration and collaboration just about everywhere you look. Like, nobody and nothing exists in the silo anymore. Like, there's too much happening across too many different geographies in too many different ways for that to be the point of view that we can take.
And Roseanne, your members cover every region of the province. Any thoughts on this?
when it comes to this idea of healthy living, we recognize tourists want to come into this province, and you're seeing adventure tourism operations cropping up everywhere, feasibility, diagnostic assessments. We are not seeing near as many for-profit or non-profit entities coming to us saying, let's test out the feasibility for this recreation structure in our community. But yet we recognize the importance it is for doing that to attract outside interest. So it's certainly something that we need to do more work in supporting, that we as a province need to do this for ourselves. We can't just use it to bring in money from a tourist. We also have to provide these opportunities for ourselves as well.
Super. We have time for one last question or comment, I think.
Hi there. Thanks, Rob, and everyone for the work you've done on vital signs. It's just really impressive work there. Two key questions. As an educator and former member of a town council, one of the things I found really frustrating, Rob, you just covered, is the lack of ability of a local council to actually exert its will on federal and provincial governments. Nothing unusual to see roads put in one year and water and sewer the next year. You know, town council needs a new building. The healthcare center needs renovation. School needs renovation. 3 separate areas. Why not put it together and have proper community centers? So the effective use of resources in a way that the local council can actually be involved and steer that in a direction and have some influence over the federal and provincial governments is important. We're really weak on local governments. You know, some thoughts on that. One of the things you mentioned in vital signs is 9 out of 100 of our population are Indigenous Canadians. And I haven't heard a lot about Indigenous Canadians, Truth and Reconciliation Commission, how that plays out in Newfoundland and Labrador. I am a member of the Northern Peninsula Mi'kmaq Band. When I was a child in school, there were no Indigenous peoples in the island of Newfoundland. That's what we were told. That wasn't policy, it's just the way the practice was. Now we have 9%, so I'm just wondering where we came from.
Thanks, Kurt. And there's a little bit on Indigenous this year, but we've had a significant amount in some previous ones. One, the map showed where the different communities were, and a lot of people have, you go into offices, you see that pinned up, but it's evolving, as you know. Just quickly for me on the municipal, federal, provincial, we haven't been a planning culture in this province. Individual families did to get through the winter traditionally, but civically, we're horrible, and we got a long ways to go. And doing it regionally increasingly, again, beat on that drum. But I know Jonas would have thoughts on that and perhaps on the Indigenous as well. And these will be your final comments, so you can also say anything else you want to say.
Really?
Yeah. I deal with faculty all the time.
So a couple points. I think the Indigenous communities around the province are probably going to experience the impacts of climate change more dramatically, more severely, especially those in Labrador, than the rest of the province. Ways of life are starting to be dramatically impacted now, and they are. It's just going to get more severe. Like when you see the numbers that Rob put up with, the average temperature increases per province or per season, the numbers are dragged up because of the changes that are projected for the most northern and Indigenous communities. So it's actually going to be more severe than it looks when you kind of look at the province as a whole. With regards to towns, municipalities, and cities, they're the ones that are on the front lines of dealing with the impacts of climate change. They are struggling around the world to get the support they need from the higher levels of government. There have been some very important initiatives, especially through the Federation of Community Municipalities in the past few years. And in the province, I know of upwards of 20 municipalities that are making steps and have very concrete initiatives towards developing their own climate adaptation plans. So it's with support from the federal government, but it's really driven from within the municipalities. They had to know to apply for the funding or connect with an organization who was able to do that for them. But they're the ones that are going to be dealing with the day-to-day of the impacts and also a lot of the actual mitigation efforts.
Super. Roseanne, thoughts on Kirk's comments or your final thoughts?
I think like one of the first screens on Civic Engagement, you're talking about how many people are interested and want to get access to information. I think that's a good thing. That means we have an engaged population. We have people that want to know what is being decided and why, and how is that going to impact me. So we need to take that one step further and make sure that those people are also having a voice in those local decisions. So when a program comes down or when a decision is made on how we can support a group or support a community, that community really needs local leadership and champions to step up and say, I think this is how it's going to work for us. And when you have that local flavor, then you recognize that something can be done flexibly. So if you're looking at a community and there's not enough entrepreneurs or for-profit entities to provide that service, we need to recognize that nonprofits and social enterprises are stepping up. We have a community that was short on childcare options, and there were no entrepreneurs that wanted to start that business. So the community banded together and created a cooperative. So recognizing that if we're going to have our communities remain the way that they are and continue to grow, we have to look at things collaboratively and differently. You really need to have that local perspective on how it's going to work in our community and make sure we provide that support to it.
Super. Kathy?
I think on the, first of all, on the sort of local government question, I think as far as healthcare goes, it's actually interesting when you look at, where I've talked about collaboration and teams and all the rest, but when you look at some of the rural communities, perhaps not the remote where it's really difficult to get everybody, but some of the rural communities, the ad hoc way in which healthcare professionals have worked together has actually worked really well for years, and so we've just relied on it, on that sort of ad hoc, oh yes, actually it works out that the public health are in the same building as the family doctor, which is in the same building as the emergency department, and so everything happens to work together. But I think as we go forward, we're realizing you can't always rely on those ad hoc kind of connections, and particularly as our communities, some of them get bigger. So for example, the metropolitan area, St. John's, Mount Pearl, Paradise, etc. Those are now relatively large cities, and so working in that ad hoc collaborative way isn't going to work anymore. And so we're realizing that we need to kind of structure ourselves better and work better, particularly in primary care, so we work together. But we can learn from that good old cottage hospital system, and what was good about it, and how did those connections work so well. So I think we're starting, as always in life, to look to the past to see how we can therefore use what worked well in the past to improve the future. With regards to the Indigenous comment, I do know that the medical school is looking very seriously at the TRC recommendations that apply to education, both with trying to promote opportunities for Indigenous physicians, to train Indigenous physicians in the future, as well as cultural safety training for all of our graduates, etc. So very definitely a focus of the medical school at the moment. And I think as I go forward, just as my final comments, I just like to say how, it inspires me to be involved in discussions like today, where I see people talking about health and wellness, about community involvement, about how health really, my two colleagues here, we come up in the beginning of this session seemingly from three different areas, but really all of us involved in important aspects of health and wellness. So thank you to everybody, and hopefully we can all focus on this together as we go forward.
Thank you, Kathy. Amazing panel. Two of them I've never met before. And so it's great to see the network and the expertise and the partnerships expanding all the time. I have a few thank yous, and then we'll set you loose. Want to thank all the people who fed into the development of vital signs. A load of people were interviewed. A load of people provided expert input from within the university and from outside, the essence of public engagement. Our internal team, Megan Eibner, Prajwala Dixit, Mandy Rousel, Deetra Walsh, Jesse Meyer, all very hands-on in producing it. The review committee, Ray Bowman, former head of rural stats for Stats Canada, Elizabeth Beale, former head of Atlantic Province Economic Council, Keith Story, former head of geography at MUN. So the silver ceiling is no issue at the Harris Center, I tell you. We take advantage of all that knowledge, expertise. Foremost of all, Kathy Newhook, I don't know where she is here. Carries, right front center. Open your eyes, Rob. Carries vital signs on her back. I mean, Harris Center is a small, motivated, committed team. And we all handle multiple files. Kathy, the Galbraith, we just had a kick-ass major success a week ago. We got the Older Workers Summit coming up next week, et cetera, et cetera. But vital signs has such a key part in our province, and I can't thank Kathy enough for her leadership. Also, the Community Foundation, Tim Crosby is here keeping an eye on me, and his team. It wouldn't exist without the Community Foundation. It's a great partnership, and we really hope it continues for the future. Our funders, Municipalities Newfoundland and Labrador, the CBDC Association, Faculty of Medicine at Memorial, YMCA, I see Jason there, thanks again. Our media partner, Saltwire, goes into every paper in the province, or pretty much, fantastic partnership, and on the web. Other media support, we can't do it without you. Thank you so much. The event support staff here at Signal Hill campus, John Duff, as always, flawless. Harris Center staff, again, this is a real amazing event for us, so I'm going to indulge myself. Boyan, Kim, Chris, Ruby, Connie, Cindy, Sherry, Mandy, and Mandy. We actually had a picture with the 3 Mandys this morning, which was great. But it's an amazing team, and everybody pitches in. Our panelists, I thought, were just amazing. Jonas, Roseanne, and Kathy, thank you. I want to thank Mandy Penny and Kathy Hawkins with Inclusion NL, and we're going to have a great rest of the day. Especially thanks to you showing up here, engaging in the discussion, taking it forward. It's going to be province-wide and beyond. We need ideas for next year. Some really great ideas already on precarity, on some of the tax benefits issues around disabilities. I want to do more on taxes. The Bank of Canada had their board of directors in St. John's this summer. A lot of people didn't know about that. They had people from fishery, aquaculture, mining, ocean tech, oil and gas, mining, if I didn't say that already. They went up and toured the Marine Institute. I saw one of their economists a week later in Halifax. I said, how'd it go? He said, we're blown away. And he said, yep, some major challenges in Newfoundland. And I'm not quoting names, I won't tell you who said this. But he said, the Maritimes, they're a bond. They're reliable, they're steady, they're going to grow a bit, but probably not that much. Newfoundland and Labrador is equity. It's risky, but he said, in 20 years, Newfoundland and Labrador could be the richest province in Canada. This is a very conservative, serious economist. So we got loads of challenges, but we got loads of social capital and loads of resources and great people. I really do think we have amazing opportunities. We just got to keep working on them. So next year's Vital Signs, get us ideas, talk about it, debate it. We don't want rose-colored glasses. We need brutal honesty, but we also need optimism. And I think there's a ton in this room of all of that. Thank you all very much. There's some goodies, coffee and tea. Hang around a bit. And thank you so much. See you next year.